Okay, well, we do need to talk about final projects, so I need everybody, if you would, please, to go jump online and go to our Canvas site. So here's the thing, and what I'm trying to do is, if you take a look, let me get into my our Canvas site first, and I'm getting a little ahead of myself. Been that kind of week, and it's only Tuesday. So if you go to our session number 5, that's this week, you'll actually see up here at the top again the overview. That's what we're going to do today. If you take a look on the System 5 resources, you will see there are 2 PDFs that are on this that I want you both to be aware of. And the first one is the final project requirements. If you actually take a look, it just says that your final project is to be the integration of your technical skills in Photoshop with your intellectual and conceptual creativity. So what this is all about, the whole thing about your final project, I want this to be work that matters to you. I want it to be your work. Preferably, I want it to be work that you're either thinking about using in your portfolio or pitching to a gallery or something like this. I do not want you just to come up with a set of files or a final project just to satisfy that requirement of this class. That is a waste of your time. So what I'm hoping is that you can figure out a way to integrate what you're learning in this class with the work that matters to you so that you get more bang for your buck. Does that sort of make sense? So there's a ton of things that we haven't gotten to in this class yet. We haven't done any real compositing per se. We tasted a little bit of it by putting those figures on those metal backgrounds, but that's not even scratching the surface. So there's a whole lot more of this to come. So you can anticipate what is still yet to come when you're thinking about the final project that you ultimately want to do or how that's going to integrate with your work. The reason I'm doing this now is that I want everybody to be thinking about what they're going to do for their final project right now. Start that process. There is an assignment if we actually take a look. So anyway, read through the proposal part right here. You'll get some idea of this. Actually, I need to talk about this other part down here for just a second. So the number of images that you actually do for this. The thing that I always say to this class, and I'm going to say it to you guys as well, is that all of you are adults by now at this stage of the game. You're all getting ready to graduate. You know what a final is, and you know what a final isn't. So for me to say to you, oh, you need 6 of those images, or no, you need 7, or you need 5, or you need 3, or what that's absurd. You know what a final is, and you know what one isn't. And you need to figure that out into your whole game here. Typically, I would say, because again, it just involves the amount of retouching. If you are going to say, I want to do portraits, that's what I do, and you've got 10 or 15 portraits that you've done some very light retouching on, whatever, that makes sense. That becomes a final. 4 of those is not a final. Does that make sense, everyone? I say this, I tell this story every time. You know the mural that's over here, that's the moose with blowing the big balloon? The guy who did that was actually in this class, and for his final project, he turned in 1 file. And you would say, well, clearly that can't be a final, right? Until you saw the over 30,000 layers that made up that file. It had taken him over a year to build this image. Is that worth a final? Oh, absolutely. He didn't have hours into this thing. He had months into it. Is a months and months worth of work a final? Yes, of course it is, right? So I'm just trying to throw that out to you guys and you're thinking about this. It's not so much about the number of files, it's much, much more about the work that you actually do, the work that's actually involved in it. Are we good on that part? Are there any questions about that part? So in thinking about that, to help really codify that thinking about it, the final project proposal is a way to jumpstart the way you are going to write about it. So the assignment that is going to be due, I think it may be due next week. I think it's actually due in 2 weeks. Don't quote me on any of that. Just look at the assignment. You'll see. I'm only looking for 2 paragraphs. The first one is telling me what you're going to do. The second one is telling me how you're going to do it. If there's any questions about this, email me. There's no point in us reading. There's no point. Don't you hate it when people read shit to you when it's sitting right up on the screen and you can read it for yourself much quicker? Yeah, so I'm not going to do that. Any questions about any of this? All right, I do want to show you some examples of past work. Again, remember I have said from the very beginning in this class that, well here, let me show you just really quickly for where the assignment part is, and just we'll check on the due date. I don't want to leave everybody hanging here. So it's right here, written final project proposal, whatever. It is done in a week. But again, it's 2 paragraphs. You'll be able to knock it out. Haha, knock out, never mind. All right, I'm going to quit Chrome because I'm trying to hold on to all of what video resources is left after running 3 different programs on this. So I do want to show you some work from previous classes to give you just some idea of other stuff that's actually happened in this class, and to also possibly make you feel more comfortable and confident about the work that you might want to choose to do or that you might want to show, and all that kind of stuff right here. Hopefully I'm going to be able to do this inside this space right here. Yeah, I'm not going to try to get this really big on the screen because, again, we've got so much to get to today, whatever. So I'm not going to bother opening all of these files up. I'm just going to go through a couple of things here. Kind of, I don't want to blow over this too quick. I want to just, again, give you guys a taste, not show you anything else. Anyway, so Alex was a student who came in. He was really interested in doing architectural photography, and he did all this incredible work where he actually eliminated all the windows in all these buildings. And it ended up being these really sort of provocative things. I mean, when you looked at them, they were actually really beautifully done. His prints were really beautiful. By the way, that reminds me, your final project is the only thing that does need to be printed in this class, so just sort of keep that part still in mind. Austin did these really sort of strange, these are all fabricated. Everything about this is fabricated. The buildings are fabricated. The locations that he put them in are fabricated. There's nothing real about any of these. So he took parts of real buildings and rebuilt and built other buildings out of it, and then put them into these sort of like lonely, desolate, somewhat dystopian places here. Some of the stuff I think worked better than other stuff. This looks a little less polished than the first one, but I thought this one was actually, really beautifully well done. And again, the prints were really beautiful, blah, 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 blah. You'll see he was only working in black and white. This I'm going to show you here because it actually shows sort of like the whole progression. So Sean here started, this was backgrounds that he actually shot, and then he went into the studio to shoot figures, and then he actually composited the 2 together. So that's basically what he had going on in all of this. Some of this stuff worked, again, a little bit better than other stuff in here. I thought this one was actually remarkably well done. This is, I thought, a very successful one because he was able to basically match lighting and color and perspective and composition and all of it, the contrast, all those issues, whatever, a little bit better together in that. I thought this one was also really well done along those same sorts of lines. Devin was this crazy guy. That's all I can say. Devin was the kind of person who he kept these copious notebooks, and he would do his research, and he would draft these notebooks, and he would he would describe the images that he would want to make, and he could work on an idea of an image to make for months. And then he would actually spend months recreating what he needed to create to actually do this. And this was this image that he had in his mind that he wanted to do. And he actually ended up shooting this. He made friends with some firehouse crew. And they let him in and they let him shoot the inside of an ambulance, an EMT ambulance, that kind of stuff. And then he went in and he shot every single one of these figures is shot by themselves in the studio and then pieced together in this. And if you really look at the interaction between, just putting somebody's arm around another person's, that is not an easy trick it's easy to do if they're together, but none of them were together. So he was just that kind of guy, and he had this incredible attention to detail, but at any rate, some sort of interesting stuff. Some of the stuff I don't remember. Some of this stuff became a little more, I don't know, the way I think about how some of the more questionable aspects of images that they run, the splash screens for Adobe Photoshop, like I could see this being one of those. Some of it was a little more sort of, kind of, parts of it were kind of interesting, parts of it were a little illustrative more than like wanting to really be kind of believable. And it has its place. And not the kind of work that I would do, but again, but that doesn't mean that it wasn't exactly the idea that he was trying to execute, because it was, and all that kind of stuff. So I thought that it certainly was strong enough for me to show it to you. So food, still lifes become here. There are complete options for you guys to be able to do this sort of stuff. And this was a girl who was actually interested in shooting food, and it ended up being, clearly if you take a look at her idea, it lends itself to creating a cohesive body of work. You do not have to do a cohesive body of work. If you show 10 images up there, and one of them is a portrait, and one of them is a beauty shot, and one of them is food, and one of them is an architectural shot, and that does not matter to me. I am not looking for a cohesive project in this class. This is not like typical finals that you would do for a different class that really sort of maybe had more direction to it. That is not what this is about. Are we good on that part? I'll show you the rest of these really quick. Again, some of these, I think, execution-wise could have been much better. The thing I struggle with the most in these, the photographic execution is pretty good, but the prep on the fruit sucks. But at any rate, you look for those really, you want it to be those really sort of like clean. So the guy that I told you about who did the mural over there, Jake, was really interested in doing these more like posters, but they all had to do with the impact that war has on children. And you'll see some of that later on here. So this starts to be, and he printed these things really big. They were actually really pretty stunning here. This is actually, it's really, again, kind of hard to see, but if you can sort of pick out the heads on the top, this is a soldiers marching, and again, that kind of stuff here. Some of these are this small, are a little bit obscure. Some of this starts to get into more of the kid stuff and that kind of stuff. So for what he's doing in here, it's not necessarily making skin look great. He's bringing all this texture into these things and using that texture to really sort of create this atmosphere and this emotional response to it. They were really, 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 really well done. Again, some of them may be a little bit obvious, but nonetheless, they were, the prints themselves were stunning. So Jeff, this stuff was really, but this is all synthetic. He actually would scan something that gave him some texture, or he would recreate this texture, and then he did these sort of like M.C. Escher impossible dimensional things, right? Like, this couldn't happen this way. This can't exist in the real world. This kind of stuff. Again, it's that whole Escher play on perspective and composition, that sort of thing. But his backgrounds are all synthetic. His shapes and his forms and the way he put them together are all synthetic. But he did a really good job. They're really consistent and they're connected and all that kind of stuff. So again, interesting, twisted stuff. But you can see this was one of the more impressive things that I actually ever saw anybody do. And part of it probably is because it became so complicated. Jeff asked me to come in and help him on this, and we worked for. I say we worked. I'm not taking any credit for this. He worked like a dog to actually make this stuff work. But what he wanted to do was, he was really into making forms out of like foam core. So what you're looking at here is these, they're not that small. They're about the size of this iMac. So that kind of shapes of foam core. And he wanted to wrap them with photographs that he'd actually done, or actually lay photographs into those spaces as if that had actually happened. And you cannot believe how difficult this gets, because every single one of these bins actually distorts the form. And so it's not like you can just wrap this stuff around. You've got to distort the picture so that it fits the distortion of the form that he's trying to put it on. But the picture was two-dimensional. The picture was flat. The form, even though it was in a photograph, had dimension to it. And especially this one, the forms themselves get so complex. So this whole face right here is actually not only going backward, but then you've got this part that flips up. But this was the trickiest part of all because it is a completely different plane. And putting this stuff together and having it actually look like it worked, it was incredible. And then he printed these things the size of like that whiteboard over there, and they were flawless. Flawless. They were just stunning. Joe's into exploring the sort of like, and again, anybody who's looked at photography in the last 15, 20 years, whatever, has seen stuff very similar to this. It was that sort of blending of day and night. That was really the kind of vibe that he was going for in here. Again, I thought some of these were a little bit more successful than others here, but it was really clever, and in some ways it was done well enough that it actually caught some people off guard, and they were looking at it and they were saying, so I don't get it. You shot this you shot this landscape of the city. What's the big deal? What did you do? What was the retouching? And he was like, well, if you look on the right side, you can tell it's night, and you look on the left side, and you can see it's the morning, and that's what I did. And they were like, oh. Anyway, so one of the things I will say about this is that, and this is just a reality of retouching in general, if you do it really, really well, nobody thinks you've done anything, which can be demoralizing as a retoucher, but you should just switch your brain to thinking that's actually the ultimate compliment. Jory, this was actually, she did this really, these two I actually am going to open up because it's, you really need to see them actually open to get the whole effect. But at any rate, Columbia College used to own the Johnson Publishing building, the building that's right up the street so it's on Michigan Avenue right around 9th. It's that really hardcore fascist looking building, brutal architecture. You know, it's the brown building. None of the sides have any windows at all. There's only windows in the very front. The rest of it is like just solid. I think it's this god-awful ugly building. I hate it. Anyway, but significantly, it's important. It was done by a relatively famous African-American architect for an African-American company. And in its day, when it was built in the 70s, it was a very different kind of thing. And anyway, the interior of the building was this museum of 70s architecture and interior design. And it was all the real stuff. So if you're into anything mid-century modern, this was the real deal. They had the real thing. And it was, anyway, Columbia bought it, and and all the shit came with it. And then it just sat empty for years. And some students managed to convince one of the teachers here to get access to it. Anyway, so Jory ended up shooting this thing. I'm going to hide all these markers right here. So if you take a look at it, this was actually up in one of the upper floors, like sort of like the president's suite. And you look at this and you say, well, okay, so what's the big deal about this? But I'm going to show you the before and after really quick right here. So this is the before, and this is the after. And you say, well, so big deal. What do I, so she turned on a couple of lights. Well, she didn't only turn on a couple of lights, she relit the entire space that is on the right side. But look at this. If you take a look at the original, you can see that the whole glass panel of this is coming out of the track. She actually puts it back in. And then she has to relight all the reflections in all of the glass. So again, you look at this and you say, well, that's no big deal. Who cares, right? I mean, she shot this room, but then you see what she actually did to rebuild this thing, and it's mind-blowing. And the time it took her was insane. If you take a look at her layer stack, you'll sort of see what I mean. It just goes on and on and on and on and on and on and on. So anyway, the other thing I wanted to show you, this is another one from the same series. And again, you look at it and you say, well, how simple could that be? What's the big deal about all of this? This is the original. So when she shot it, she doesn't even bother to remove all the shit that's on the floor in the front. But then once that's gone, she has to relight it. She has to build the floor and the background behind it. She had to rebuild all of the stained wallpaper that's on the back wall, and she had to match up the pattern to do that. Do you know how hard this shit is to do? I mean, this is just, again, you look at it and you say, well, so big deal. I don't, what's the big deal about all of this? But you get into the woods and you really start to do this stuff, you question why you took on something that's that challenging. I was thrilled that she did, though, and I thought the images turned out remarkably well. Josh is somebody who does stuff that would be, this is what most people would actually consider. I'm going to open up just this one as well, just to give you guys some idea. Classic beauty. He was a beauty photographer. That's what he was really interested in doing, but this is the kind of work that he actually did on this. So when you're thinking about your final project, this is another thing just to keep in the back of your mind, because this will happen as well. When you actually do your final prints, I am also asking everybody to do basically smaller, not so great versions of the befores, so we can look and see where you started and where you got to. Does that make sense? So your final pieces should be really beautiful, but your before pieces really are more reference photography. They don't need to be these beautiful print. I mean, they don't need to be that. I'm not trying to get you guys to do that part. But you can see here that this has significantly more impact when you see where the image, what he started with. Does that sort of make sense? So it's just something I want you guys to also keep in mind. And then he created all these beautiful ads. And again, if you were to look at these, the origins of all of these look exactly like they're pretty much consistent with the other stuff that he'd actually done. I've only had a handful of grad students in this class. This is one of them. Kai was actually a really interesting guy. I'm also going to open up one of his images to show you what Kai did. He was a grad student. He was really interested in doing architecture and landscape work. He does some really, really, really beautiful work. One of the few people I've seen in that program whose work I would almost actually consider collecting. But again, just to give you some idea, so this is his before and after. Nuts. Anyway, almost done. So Seamus was doing this fashion stuff, and these are actually real photographs with these real sets that he went in and manipulated even further. I'll open up one of them just so you can get a little bit better idea of what really happened in here. But these are these real photographs so the sets were real, the models were real, but then he went in and he actually altered everything about them. He altered not only all the color, but he's stretching models, he's distorting him, he's doing all of that kind of stuff. But he did it all in the context of this set that he was actually working on, and they were just, I was floored when I saw these things. And again, the volume, the amount of work that's actually in here. So this would be, again, the more sort of classic fashion aspect of. So just because I've said this isn't a fashion class, if you are interested in doing fashion and beauty, that doesn't mean you shouldn't be doing that for this. You should. I think Sarah's, yeah, this is another one I'm looking for. So this is a girl who did these really sort of like interesting images. All of this is found imagery. She didn't shoot any of this. And you don't have to shoot any of your stuff either. That's not what this is about. I don't care about your source. I care about where it ends. Right? Almost done. I just want to make sure that I feel like I'm giving you guys the notion that you can pretty much shoot anything you want. Yeah, two last ones to actually show you. So Terry was really into doing cars. I mean, that's what he was all really, that's what he wanted to do. And again, so all of this is composited. Some of these are actually a little bit better than others, I thought. But this is a model car. This car is, this big, that he actually put into real spaces. This is actually a place on Lower Wacker Drive. And when you first look at it, you're just like, okay, I buy into that completely. So anyway, doesn't appear to be many car people in here, car photography people in here anyway. So probably Tim actually has gone on. Tim Blokel is actually, I think, it's been a while, so I haven't touched bases with Tim in ages, so I think he's still around in Chicago. He graduated out of Columbia College, and he was one of the first people to realize that you could add value and a lot of cost to your job position if you were a digital tech that could also retouch, and that you could then convince a photographer, don't just hire me to be the digital tech on set, don't just hire me to be the retoucher after the fact, hire me to be both of those people the whole time. So he would go in, and again, if you're lucky enough to actually get to work with any of the really super big name photographers, most of them have a retoucher sitting right there while they're shooting. Because the advantage of it is that a retoucher can then say to the photographer, hey, if you can just give me this exposure with this hand doing this, that'll give me the piece that I actually need to put into your image to do this part, whatever. And then the photographer can actually shoot that, and you've got the source material. So instead of having to rebuild source material or go find it or change it or warp it or liquefy it or all that kind of stuff, whatever, you've got all the bits and pieces to put together. And that's the way he sold. So he started a whole business that was that. And a ton of people, especially advertising people, hired him to do this, and so this is what Tim does, or is what Tim does. Impressive, no? Yeah. So, are there questions about any of this? Are we feeling all kind of good and understanding about all this stuff? All right. I want to quickly look at a couple of things that came in. Again, these are the things that I'm going to ask you guys. So has everybody had a chance to copy down all those files from that week number 4? Okay, so if I'm asking somebody to open a file, again, I said this to you guys last week. I'll say it to you probably one more time, but not a whole lot after this, is that do not, if I open your file and actually go to do some work on it, I'm not picking on you, I'm not trying to shame you, I'm not trying to embarrass anybody. That is not what this class is about. We're all way beyond that part, right? So this is just about learning how to do things, work things. And unfortunately for the people whose name falls earlier in the alphabet, I tend to go to you first because that's how I grade. So I'm not picking on the people who's, the A, B's, and C's in here and ignoring the XYZ people, whatever. It's not that at all. It's just when I find something and it's like, okay, that's an issue that we should really talk about or that we should look at, that's what's going on here, all right? So please do not feel picked on or any of that other kind of stuff. So there you go. We will start this right off the bat. Okay, so the first one I'd like everybody to open is Jessica's. And so can everybody find that guy? I'll wait. So what? I'm sorry?
Is this on the server?
It is on the server. There's an entire folder on the server, week 4, turn-in. Oh. Don't run it off the server, though. Copy it to your hard drive. If you run it off the server, you'll just, it's really laggy. You won't be very happy. Okay, so when you take a look at this, open it up, whatever, it looks great. If you take a look at the layers palette, I'm going to shrink my layers palette up so that I can see all of the layers in here. Basically, there's a background layer on the very bottom. Turn the eyeball off by just clicking on it. And then you'll see some holes start to appear in the frame. You'll see some spaces that start to appear. We need to look at this in a way that I'm looking at all four pieces. So remember, the assignment for this was to take, there's four basic elements in this image. There's the blue background, there's the yellow and white sweater, there's her hair and her skin. Those were the, so the assignment asks you to separate those four elements out onto their own layer, use a layer mask to only reveal those parts. So in theory, and this is in theory, if you put those four pieces back together into a single image, looking at it the way we're looking at this right now, everything would line up again and it would look like the original. Unfortunately, there's a major problem that prevents that from happening, and we will talk about that later in just a little bit, and I'll show you why that actually happens. The way Photoshop deals with transparency is not necessarily what you would expect. It actually, in the end, works better for most of the things that you want to do, but this is one of those scenarios where it will actually leave information out, which can be a problem. So this is part of the reason I wanted you guys to do this with me right now. So everybody get this image open, right? So if you hover over any eyeball and hold down your Option key and click, it will turn every other eyeball off. If you hold down your Option key again and click again, it will turn everybody back on. So it's just a really quick way to isolate a single layer to see what's really going on that layer by itself. So I'm going to actually ask you to look at the blue background layer, and Jessica, thank you for actually naming your layers. This part becomes really important. Again, if you're dealing with 2 or 3 layers, it doesn't matter so much that you name your layers, but you get into, well, in like Jacob's case, 35,000 layers. If you haven't named that stuff and all the groups that are holding or whatever, you're dead in the water. Because there's no way you can look at that. I mean, the time it takes you to look through that to find the layer you want, nightmare. So at any rate, holding down the Option key and clicking on the eyeball I'm going to do for the very top layer, the blue background layer. So I'm holding down the Option key, and then I'm going to, again, keyboard shortcut, the spacebar and the Command key, or spacebar and Control for Windows. You get the magnifying glass, and I'm going to zip in and look at this edge. And guys, all compositing is about the edges. It's about the edge transition. Having everybody mask out the center of this girl's head is no problem at all. You can do that with a brush or a lasso tool. It's the edge transition that makes for a successful selection or a successful composite. Nothing else. It's all about the edges. So this is the part that I actually go to and look at. And so in looking at this, you say to yourself, well, that looks pretty good, right? Let's knock this out. What I want everybody to do is hover now over the mask. So I've just got my cursor hovering over the mask. Now hold down your Option key and click on the mask. It will show you the mask. And immediately you can see the problem. All of this area right in here, all of this hair in here should be solid black. Not the stuff that's out on the edge, but this stuff that's laying right in here should all be solid black, and it isn't. But you don't, when you're sitting here, again, hold down your Option key and click on that again, and it will go away. You can now sort of spot that there is some sort of darker tones of, they're grays that are in that part of her head that don't belong here. So again, I'm going to hold down the Option key, click on this is what I call contamination. This is all contamination that we're talking about in here. So to fix this part, again, if you've got your tablet ready to go, if not, use your mouse right now or your trackpad right now, but get your tablet working in a second. Hit the B key to get a brush, and again, because I'm doing this work here and I'm worried about overspraying. What do I mean by overspraying? This is, everybody look at the screen so that you know what I mean by overspraying. I'm going to make my brush relatively big, and I'm going to make it a completely soft brush. Black is going to be my foreground color. I just hit the X key to get black as my foreground color. And watch what happens right now. My brush right now is not touching anything. If you take a look at the right edge of my brush right now, that is all in solid hair right here. You would think that I would be safe to go ahead and make a mark doing this. But watch what happens. I'm going to go ahead and do that. And did you just see the tone that jumped out into the fine hair? That's going to fuck up your image. So I'm going to say Command Z to undo that. Instead, I'm going to change the blending mode of my brush from normal down to overlay, and now I can do that very same trick again, and you will notice nothing comes out into the white area of my mask. So now I actually would not use a brush this big. I like a little bit more control, so I'm going to make it a little bit smaller. I'm also going to make it a little bit harder edge. So if I'm really worried about overspray, I will do a completely hard brush, because again, I'm trusting the luminosity of the mask I've already built in here to control that. The problem is with a completely hard brush right now, watch what happens to this screen, right to my image right here. As I come through right here, you can spot that really hard edge right there. You can see that transition. I don't want that, so Command Z to undo that. So I need to be somewhere between the two extremes. I don't want a completely soft brush because I'm worried about overspray going into my background, but I don't want a completely hard brush because you will see that every single time. So I'm going to use a brush of 50% hardness, and you will see that this actually gives me exactly what I'm looking for in here, and I'm going to clean all of those parts of it up. You can see all of this stuff in here. Looking at this right now, instead of using this brush to clean all this up, my temptation would be, I'm going to go back to where I just opened this, my temptation would be to run levels on this guy again, because I don't think this is actually strong enough. To do that with the blue background actually selected, so it is this blue background, I've got this mask selected. Command L will bring up the levels dialog box, and you can, we're not laying down numbers anymore, we're just eyeballing this, but I'm going to take my black point slider and start to push it, and again, I don't want to be too aggressive about this. I don't want to go out and ruin all of that other hair, but just that small little bump up to an 11 here actually gave me exactly what I needed to give me the transition I'm looking for. I've still got contamination in here that I need to get with a brush, but this gives me a lot better blend in, and now I can do my brush into these areas of the highlights that actually really need it to be in here, and I'm off to the races. But the rest you can see is this. Look at this shoulder right here. Did you notice, again, hold down your Option key, click on the mask so it goes away. Did you notice that that shoulder was not completely being hidden by your mask? No, it looks completely transparent. I can see the checkerboard on it, but if you hold down the Option key and you look at your mask, you can spot the contamination on that a million miles away. Still working with an overlay brush, you can hit that entire thing, and that's how we fix that layer. You'll also notice that it pulled out all the sort of like little fuzzy stuff on the edge of that. You want to keep that because that's what makes this mask believable. That sweater is fuzzy. If the sweater is cut out like with a razor blade, it doesn't look real because everybody says, okay, well, the sweater's fuzzy, but that looks like a piece of latex. Make sense? If you zoom in now to that shoulder, you will see that our overlay brush did add contamination to the background. You can see it right here. Look at all of those little dots that are sitting above that. To get rid of those little dots, make your brush considerably smaller. So again, I use the bracket keys just to the right of the P key. I am going to go to a completely soft brush now because this edge is completely soft. Now I do want that well, not really the overspray, but I want the quality of edge that a softer brush gives me here because I don't want to lose all the feathery part of the dark part of my mask that's actually shielding the sweater, but I do need to clean up the background because I'm seeing stuff, I'm seeing contamination in there. However, to do this well, and we might as well get to this right now, this is a good time to do this. What is the difference in flow and opacity when you've got a brush going? Anyone? Wow, today will be the day I change your life. But I know you leave here every day, every Tuesday saying that. Wow, changed my life again. Yeah, no. All right. I need everybody to make a brand new file for me. Don't close this guy up. Synthetic file. Command N will actually be the keyboard shortcut for that. I typically, when I do this, I will use the drop-down menu next to my width to go to inches because I work in both, but this will be fine. I just need to make an 8 by 10, so the width is already selected. I'm going to make that a 10 because I'm going to have it horizontal. None of this really matters. You just need a blank image to work on. And then I'm going to do an 8 for the height. I'm going to make 300 pixels per inch for my resolution, and then the rest you can pretty much leave as it is. It should have RGB color, 8-bit, and with a white background. If it doesn't have a white background, you can click on this drop-down menu and you can pick white. Anyway, and then just click OK. So it gives us just a brand new brush. That's all I was trying to get to work on. I'm going to make this brush larger. So again, I'm using the bracket keys just to the right of the P key. The one immediately to the right of the P key is the open bracket, which makes your brush smaller. The one to the right of that is the closed bracket key, which makes it larger. I am going to change my blending mode of my brush back to normal. This is why I keep saying to you guys all the time, your eyes need to go immediately up to that options panel. It's for this exact reason. If you started this exercise and didn't remember that you had your brush set to overlay, you would not see any of this. So again, it's always, that's the part, when something goes wrong, my top suggestion is go up to the options menu and look to see what actually is going wrong. First off, I'm going to double click on the hand to get this thing as big as I can get it. Then the B key again, back to a brush. I'm going to change the edge of my brush to make it a completely hard brush. I am going to leave it as normal. Again, I've now got a brush, but I've also got a drop-down menu. If I click on this image, it will get rid of the drop-down menu, but it will also put a mark on my image, and I don't want to do that. So simply click on the word Adobe up at the top. That gets rid of the flyout menu without doing anything to your brush part right here. We do have an opacity of 100 and a flow of 100 both. I'm going to hit the D key to default my foreground and background colors to black and white. If white is your foreground color, hit the X key to make black your foreground color, because what I want to do is paint with black on this image. So to do that, I'm going to come over here to the very top, and I'm simply going to click and drag across. And you can see it's a very hard brush. It lays down 100% black on 100% white. And that's what you would expect to happen here. That's what you guys have been working with forever, right? This isn't news to anyone, right? Change your opacity now to 50%. To change your opacity, you can either click on the little drop-down slider, the drop-down arrow right next to the opacity value, and drag it. Or what I do is I use a scrubby slider for everything. I just hover over the word opacity. I click and drag to the right or to the left. If you click and drag to the left, you'll actually take it down. And so I'm going to go down. If you get close, 51 is more than fine. You can actually select the opacity and type the value in. You could type a 50 in. But now what I want you to do is this. Watch my screen first before you do this. I want you to click and drag across, but do not pick up your mouse. Just keep your cursor off your tablet. Just keep going back and forth and back and forth and back and forth and back and forth. And what you see is it does not add to opacity. We're not building opacity here at all. What this is doing, and this is an important thing to know about opacity, it looks at the color that we're trying to paint, and that is black on my screen. So on my foreground color, it's black. It looks at the value of the tone that I'm actually painting it on, and this is white. So it's giving me my 50% gray. Make sense? But it's not cumulative. As I keep going back and forth and back and forth, I can do that all day. It will never get anything more than 50%. However, when I lift my cursor up off of that and come back down and hit a second version of that, you'll notice that it actually does get darker in that area. But again, if I keep going back and forth and back and forth, it never gets any darker than that. But you'll also notice that it did not go black. You would have thought, well, okay, 50% gray was actually 50% gray plus 50% gray should be 100%. It should be black. But it's not. Remember what I just said to you. The brush, the way the brush works, it looks at the tone you're trying to paint, which is black. But then it looks at the tone you're painting on. I'm painting on 50% black. So it's giving me the middle of that, which turns out to be 75% black. Does that make sense to everyone? Yes?
I have a big brush, but it's still painting very
Oh,
small.
then if you have that, it has to do with pressure. So if you click on your drop down, so everybody should do this anyway, come up to your options palette, There is a drop down, it's a thing that's got a little brush on it. There's a drop down menu right here. This is actually your, take it back, it's not there. It's the one right next to it, the one that actually, where you control the hardness of your brush. If you click on this and you get a drop down, I have no idea what defaults you have got going right now. Do you have something that says general in the brushes? So there's a whole set of brushes. If you drag this whole menu out, you'll see there's a whole set of brushes that go, that are loaded in here, and you can do different kinds of brushes, types of brushes. The two things that I would suggest that you guys do if you've actually got this set up like this, scroll down to the very bottom of this, and at the very bottom, see if you see anywhere legacy brushes. In my case, I don't, but I don't know if that's because I've just upgraded to this version of Photoshop. Nope, I've still got mine. They're sitting in here. Do you guys have legacy brushes? Okay, to have legacy brushes, come up to the little gear that's at the very top of this drop-down menu. You'll see it's the little gear that's at the very top. Click on that and you'll get a fly-out menu, and in that fly-out menu you can say that you want to, at the very bottom, legacy brushes. Just click on that. It will actually add legacy brushes to your setup. But even if you don't have that or can't find it or don't want to use it, if you click and open up your general brushes, so they should be at the very top. Can everybody find those? Open that up and you will actually see up at the very top you have 6 brushes that really matter in this. And in my case, I'm going to say to you, you only want to use the top 2. So what they are, and they're actually previews across the top. The unfortunate thing about these previews across the top is these are not static. If I go down here and I pick some weird other brush, I'll show you. If I pick this brush right here and actually do something with it, that brush actually becomes something up here. It's this last one up here in the top. So this thing up at the very top, it used to be where you just had your brushes, whatever you picked was there. Now this thing is sticky. It's like a menu. It's like the most recent menu that you have in Word, or the most recent image that you have in your file menu. So it can get really confusing. Ignore those things up at the top unless you really know what they are. But in the special brushes that actually open up, you've got 2 at the top, and the only difference in the 2 at the top is that the first one's got a really soft edge, the second one's got a really hard edge. And if you click on the really soft one, you'll see that it sets your hardness at 0, and if you click on the hard one, it doesn't change the size of the brush, it just changes hardness. But pressure is not involved in this. So that's why these are the 2 you want to use, because pressure in Photoshop allows you to do many things. The most obvious, or the 2 most obvious, is one will be the size of your brush, and the other will be the opacity of your brush. So if you take a look at the 2 brushes that follow this, this is a soft round brush that's pressure controls the size. So this may be what you have set, and so it requires you to use more pressure to actually give you the size of your brush. Yeah, it probably is. The second one down does the same thing. It's just a hard edge brush, but again, the amount of pressure will actually control the size of your brush. And then the last 2 down that most people would work with would be pressure controls the opacity of your brush. Now, there's people who love this. I'm going to try to teach you a way of avoiding all of this so that you don't have to mess with this stuff. But for right now, working, especially if you are new on a tablet, do not use these pressure sensitive controls on this. You will hate your life. But use the first 2, and I basically just click the first one, and then you don't have to ever click it again, because now the only hardness slider that I'll actually use is the slider itself. I don't pick these guys anymore. And that actually should take care of this for you. But back to our scenario back here, if I go back to a completely hard brush and make it a little bit bigger. So I've now got my second version of this that gives me my 75% gray. If I hit this another time, you will see that it continues to get darker, but you can still see the difference in the black that's above this and the black that is actually here. In theory, you will never get to black because it's always going halfway between the color that you want, which is black, that's my foreground color, and what's laying underneath it. And so in theory, you'll never get to black, but the truth of it is, if you do this long enough, you can keep hitting this back and forth. I'm lifting my cursor every single time I'm doing this to really build that density. You will then ultimately get to black. So that is how opacity works. I'm going to ask you now to grab opacity and drag it all the way back up to 100%, and now take flow, and I want you to drag flow down to 10%. So what flow does is, if we just come over to your screen and hold down, oh, I'm sitting here looking at this. What is this? This is actually the other brush that I used really quickly, so let me get rid of that. Okay, so back to this. What flow does is this. Flow you can think of as, again, like water coming out of a hose. Okay, so it builds density over time. So with flow, what I want you to do is now start dragging and go back and forth just like we did before. But now what you see is happening is that with flow, you actually do start building density without ever taking your mouse off of the trackpad. And eventually you will get to black, because this is not based on any color that's actually underneath it. So that's how flow works. However, there's an exception to this. And the exception to this is, if we can, I can't scroll around anymore, so I'm going to hit, I'm just going to start all over again and fill this with white. So white is my background color right now, so if you don't have to select anything. You've only got one layer going, it is selected, you can see it's highlighted. Hold down the Command key, because Command Delete will fill with your background color. My background color was white. And I want you to do the flow thing again up at the very top. So just start going back and forth, and you can see that as you're going, as you're painting back and forth, you never have to lift your mouse up, but it builds density over time. However, if you come down right underneath it and just click your mouse or your stylus down on your trackpad and hold it in place, nothing happens. It doesn't build density at all. It doesn't work like an airbrush. However, if you look up at your options bar, right next to the flow, there's a thing that looks like an airbrush. If you click on that thing that looks like an airbrush, and now below the dot that you were just holding, now click and hold down, you can see it builds density over time. So these are the controls that I want you to use to do your brush. My suggestion again is to not use that airbrush feature until you get really good at working with this trackpad. If you've got too many things happening, inevitably something is going to happen that you do not want to happen. So keep your variables down to only one, and you'll be much, much happier in doing this. So I'm going to uncheck this to get rid of that part. I'm going to close up this image. You don't need to save that. And I'm going to go back to what I was originally talking about. And it's these little things that are sitting here. It's the contamination that's on the background above that shoulder. I'm going to take my flow all the way back up to 100%, but I'm going to drop my opacity down to 50%. I want to do this slowly as I hit this whole thing in. B key, smaller brush. You'll see that what was a very relatively small brush on the image that I was just working on is a giant one here. It's just because of the difference in resolution of the image. I am going to make sure that this is a completely soft brush. I'm going to make sure that white is my foreground color by hitting the X key. And then I'm simply going to come over to this area. I'm going to make my brush a little bit larger. I'm going to come over to this foreground area where that contamination is, and I'm going to, everybody watch my screen really quickly as I do this. I'm going to change this to overlay to protect the area that I'm working with in here. I'm going to simply click and drag out, click and drag out, click and drag out, click and drag out. You can hit it multiple times, but I'm just tapping and pulling away, tapping and pulling away. It keeps that fuzzy little edge along the top that I want, but it gets rid of the contamination that's in the background. And you can just run it down along your entire image, and that's how I would actually fix that part of it. If we hold down the Command key, the space bar, and the Option key, you get the negative magnifying glass, and we can zip back out, and you can see all the other problems. This is contamination. Look at that area right on her finger, contamination. The area of her sweater down at the bottom, contamination. All of this, you can actually take your opacity back all the way up to 100%. You can also change your brush because you want to stay in the lines here. You don't want overspray going into your background. You would want this to be 100% hard brush, and then X key to make foreground color black, and then you can simply knock that out. You can actually do the same thing over all of this. And then as you zip back out, you can see, oh, I've got contamination in the fingers. How many people picked that up? No one. So, one of the most important things that you can do when you start doing this work is looking at your mask by itself. So, I'm also going to invert my mask because there are things that you will see when it's black on white that you will see, but there's other ways that things that you will miss, and if you invert this, you actually might spot this. So to invert it, make sure that your mask is selected and it's the only thing showing. Again, remember, I held down the Option key and clicked on it, and that shows just the mask itself. But then to invert it, Command-I. It simply inverts this image, and then I can actually take a look at this even more. I can still see the contamination down here on the fingers. And then I'm going to look up in here. Actually, that's all pretty clean up in there. Is this making sense, everybody, what we're talking about doing here? I cannot stress how important it is, and most of you guys got this memo in my comments that I sent to you, how important it is to be looking at your masks by themselves. You got a great selection. Everything looks perfect. That doesn't mean it is. You need to go in and look at your masks, look at the edge, invert your mask. You need to do all of those sort of tricks. Make sense? You can also do the inversion when you're looking at the image. So if you hold down the Option key and click on the mask again, you'll get the whole image back. But this was to actually show, the mask was designed to show the blue background, but I've just inverted this mask to actually be able to look at the mask. Originally, I'm going to hit Command-I to invert it back. Originally, it was just designed to actually look to show the blue. But you don't really have a sense of what's going on here in the hair in that transition. To get a better idea to see how successful the mask is there, invert your mask, Command-I, and then you can see how much did she get rid of all the blue background? She did, but in my estimation, this is way too aggressive. You should have some of that blue background still in this. We call that spill. We're going to talk today about how to get rid of spill. But this was a move to actually get rid of all of that blue background, and it makes it too aggressive. That's one of the reasons that you had so much contamination left in the hair, was that the mask itself was actually too aggressive in terms of what it was actually going after. Questions about this? All right, you can close this guy up. You don't need to save that. We're going to take a look at Aaron's next. So if everybody can jump back into that same folder and open Aaron's image. So there's good news and bad news. Again, the one I want to look at, her edge that I'm looking at right here is going to be her sweater mask. So if you scroll down and look in the whole layer stack, there is a sweater. It's not turned on right now because she's got a full composite that's built up at the very top. That part doesn't matter. Go ahead and turn on the eyeball next to the sweater, and then hold down the Option key and click on the eyeball, and it'll turn everybody else off. It's just a quicker shortcut to get to it. If we take a zoom in, where I want you to actually come in is really the left part of the sweater where it's actually laying against her neck. And if you take a look at it right here, you can see that what's missing along this edge right here, the sweater, the sort of like the cabling of the sweater actually should have dimension, and you can see there's a hint of it happening right here, but you don't actually see it here. Again, if you hover over this sweater image now, you've got to actually select it. Turning on the eyeball is not enough. You've got to make the sweater actually active. Go ahead and click on the mask as well, so the mask is now actually selected. Now hold down your Shift key and click, and it will put a red X on the layer mask, which will temporarily hide it. Now this is one of the advantages. This is the reason I said don't ever apply your layer masks, is that the whole image is here. You're just using the mask to hide what you want to hide and show what you want to show. You're not doing any damage to this image at all. I can continue to refine this, but what I'm talking about in Aaron's case that's actually missing is this little scalloped edge right here. It's subtle, but again, if you can get this subtlety in your work, this is the stuff that separates you from all the other hacks out there who are using select subject and thinking it works. Make sense? So if you hold down the Shift key again and click on that X, it will actually go away. So this allows you to go back and turn it on and off and sort of get a preview of what you've got and what you're missing. Another thing that you can do, click on the layer mask to make it active. When you've actually clicked on the mask, your properties panel changes to control your mask. And you can see, if you take a look at the very top on the properties panel, I'm going to scroll down a little bit more so you can see everything that's actually in that panel. You've got things that you can do to your mask. If you look at the controls on the very bottom, you can invert your mask right here. So if you can't remember that Command I, just clicking on it will do the same thing. Clicking on it will bring it back. You can click on color range, which just goes up and does a select for color range. So it selects, comes down to color range. It's just a shortcut for that. Select and mask, again, it's the select and mask under the select menu. Where it's just a shortcut for that. Feathering will actually take your mask and make it softer. So if you hold down the Option key and click on the layer mask, we're now just looking at the mask, and you can see the part that's actually missing in the scalloping. That's what we want to try to get back. But if you click on feather, it'll actually make your mask really soft. So this is a way to soften up your mask after the fact if you didn't do it when you were actually converting a selection to a mask. I'm going to drag that feathering all the way back down. And then finally, you can actually drop the opacity of your layer mask. If you hold down the Option key and click again on that so that you can see the image, if you then come to the density of your layer mask and start to drop it down, it will actually show you. It starts to work kind of like the onion skin does in Photoshop. It'll give you a way to preview what's in your mask or what's being hidden by your mask and what's being shown by your mask. So it's just a way of actually seeing that part. But I'm going to crank it all the way back up again, and we're going to take a look at this. I'm going to have the layer mask itself selected. Everybody good with me? I know I'm flying through this, guys, but that's kind of how the rest of the semester is going to be. If you get lost, this is why I begged you, class number 1, stop me. I'm more than happy to get you caught up, and then we'll go on. So, is everybody okay? God, I shouldn't have done all that cocaine this morning. I could probably get fired for that, couldn't I?
I'm telling Ross right now.
Go for it. After the fucking week I've had, it's like, I don't know, it could be a blessing in disguise.
If he responds to his email.
Well, yeah, there you go. Well played. Well played. Okay. So I'm going to try to refine this edge. There's 2 ways we can go about it. I'm going to show them both to you right now. So make sure that you've got the layer is still selected, that the mask is selected. You can tell it is because it has the little white brackets around it. We're going to first start off with select and mask. So just the regular one, up to the select menu, down to select and mask. This will bring us into the select and mask program, and you can sort of see the edge. Again, I've got this now on onion skin, but if you click on your drop-down menu and you come down to all layers, it'll actually show you what we were looking at earlier. If I had on all the other layers, then we would be able to see that, but in this case, this is what we were actually looking at, so this is where I want to work from this to get this part. So, no, yes, on layers. So if you have nothing else turned on, it'll just be what you see. But this is the legitimate preview of what you're ultimately going to get. So that's why this is typically where I work. So, but this edge right now, to actually get it, we're going to use the Refine Mask tool that's in here. So it's not the top brush. The top brush is the quick selection tool. It's the one that's right underneath it. If you click on that guy, remember this works. We went through Refine Edge last week. All this tool does is it says, where's the radius? Where do you want me to run this algorithm, and where do you not want me to run this algorithm? If you click on Show Edge and up right next to your guy right here, you won't see anything. Again, I think that's one of the problems with this. It's not showing me any radius in here. I would like to see that, but nonetheless, this is the edge of my mask. I'm going to make my brush a little bit smaller. Again, the bracket keys work here just as well as they did inside of Photoshop, but it's the second tool down. You will notice that there is no flow, there is no opacity slider. That does not work here. It is either yes, run the algorithm here, or no, don't run it here, and that's your only options. But I'm going to click and drag along this line to actually try to get that part back. And you can see it actually makes things worse. If you take a look at it, it's not giving me the missing scalloping of that edge of the yarn. It's actually eating away at the yellow yarn that's in the middle. And this is something about a third of you ran into. You ran Refine Edge on all this stuff, and you just said, well, it's got to be better, and didn't bother to look at the edge. A lot of times Refine Edge makes your shit worse, and if it makes it worse, don't use it. So I'm going to hit Command Z to undo that. Just try to remember in your mind what that looked like. I'm going to cancel out of here. We're going to try the second version of Refine Edge. Again, I've still got that layer mask is selected. The second version, you hold down the Shift key and then go to the Select menu down to Select and Mask. And it brings up the old version of Refine Mask, which I personally think is still superior in some ways to what goes on in the Select and Mask workspace. And we're going to find out right now if you think it's better or worse. So again, I'm going to use the Refine Edge brush tool. So it's on the tools. It's a much smaller window. We're not in a different workspace. It's the tool brush. If you click on the flyout menu at the very bottom of the right-hand corner, hello. You will actually get the Refine Edge Radius tool or the Erase Refinements tool. Remember, we want to use the top one, the Refine Radius tool. And now if you come over onto your image, again, I'm making my brush slightly smaller, and I'm going to click and drag down on this guy now, and you can see it lays down this really hardcore black line. That's really just showing you where your brush works. And it does a little bit better job of finding some of the scalloping at the top, but it still eats into all of the sweater. So that's not going to work for me either. So neither one of these refined edges worked. So I'm going to hit cancel to get out of that. I'm going to go back to the layer mask itself. I want to look at it by itself. So that's what I'm going to do. I'm hold down the Option key and click on the layer mask. And you can see that the issue that I've got here, what I'm really looking to recover is, if you take a look at the white area of the mask, it's actually showing the sweater, which is what I want. If you look at the black area of the mask, or in this area that's up in here, this white area down here is showing the sweater, the black up in here is hiding the skin, which is what I want. But this transition area that's happening right in here in the middle, it's got grays in it, which are hiding the sweater. This is where I think the stuff is that I actually want. The problem is that I don't want to grab a regular brush, hit the B key, go into a regular brush, and then go in here and try to paint hit the X key to make white. I'm not going to go in here and try to paint this, whatever, that's a nightmare. I would never try to do that. Command Z if you did try to do that. Instead, change your brush to overlay, and you will see now exactly what an overlay brush actually does. I'm going to make my brush just a little bit smaller. Click and drag across this right now, and you can see it's actually taking those grays and making them white, allowing more sweater to be shown in that area. I'm going to hit Command Z to undo that, just so we can watch this in real time. Hold down the Option key, click on your layer mask again to show the entire image. Make sure that your layer mask is what is still selected. And again, when you do that, and I don't know why this is, but when you do that, sometimes Photoshop can flip your foreground and background color. In this case, it did not flip mine. White is still my foreground color. I'm working on my layer mask, and I'm going to click and drag down again, and you can actually see it gives me the edge of the sweater that I want. And also, you can say, well, that skin that's showing here, that small little bit, that is not. That is actually the drop shadow from the sweater on that skin, or actually on the sweater itself. But if you take a look at this, or Command Z that, you can actually see better. But you could argue that's too strong. You actually showed too much of this. If that's your case, drop your flow. And when we talk about dropping flow, I'll be really honest with you guys. This is a hard thing to get your head around, but you should try to get your head around it. When people first start working with flow, they'll drop their flow down to 50%. It's meaningless. 50% lays down so much ink so quick, you will not notice the difference in it and anything else. Typically, working in flow, there's some exceptions to this, but they're very rare. I'm rarely above 10%. I'm usually down. I'm going to suggest you guys to do this work right here. Come down to like 5%, and let's see how it works for us. So down at 5%, so again, I'm going to use the scrubby slider to get close. I'll stay at 3%, doesn't matter. White is my foreground color. I'm just going to start scrubbing back and forth on this to try to bring that edge in. Now, I didn't see that happen quick enough for my liking, so I'm going to hit Command Z to undo that, and I'm going to bump my flow up to 10%, or close to it, and then we'll see again. So again, I'm going to start to work on this, and you can see how quickly that comes in. My 12% too fast for me. Command Z to undo that. I'm going to drag it down to like maybe an 9%, whatever. And now I can start to paint in on this to sort of get a compromise between bringing back the sweater part that I think was missing without getting too much of that harder edge drop shadow that's actually on the skin part. Does this make sense to everyone, what's going on here? This is why you're in this fucking class. Because there's a ton of hacks out there that would never take the time to show you exactly this shit. The good retouchers are all about nuance. They're not about going in and hammering this to death. Make sense? All right. Wow, that sounded preachy, didn't it? Has anybody here ever seen the movie Elmer Gantry? Put it on your list, and when you watch it, think of me. I'm going to jump out really quickly. I'm not going to spend as much time doing this because, like I said, we're going to actually work on this image, a version copy of this image in just a second. So I'm only going to look at one other really quickly. Maybe a couple. Lena, unfortunately, is not feeling well today, so she's not here. But we are going to look at her image. So if you come down to the one that is, what the hell's Lena's last name? I think it's Rudd. Is it Rudd? Yeah. Okay, so Rudd, or however you say, R-A-U-D. If you can open that guy up here really quickly. When I talk about masks being too aggressive, if you take a look at the blue background mask, and you can see she's named some of these, but some of them are not necessarily named. So the blue background, this one that's background copy, you can see where the figure is black and the background is actually white. That's what we're actually looking for here. That's what's going to show the blue background. So again, hold down your Option key and click on the eyeball next to that. It'll get rid of everybody else. There's guidelines on this image right now that annoy me, so I'm just going to hit Command H to get rid of those guidelines. And then I'm going to zoom into this upper side, this upper left-hand corner to take a look at the hair. And you could look at this and you could say, well, you know, that's not too bad. I mean, it seems to be okay. You know, I'm not really sure about this. But again, we now need to do all the tricks to actually see just how good this is. Just because I turned on the eyeball, look at my screen right here. I've actually got the eyeball on the sweater layer is the one that's highlighted with it turned off. So until I pick the blue background layer, all the work that I'm trying to do won't happen because I'm on the wrong layer. So remember, eyeballs and visibility has nothing to do with the layer that you've got selected. So make sure that you've got this one called background copy selected. Hold down your Option key and click on the mask and you can actually see the problems that I've got. There's a massive amount of contamination in the hair right here. All this shit in here should all be black. There's a hole in her mask right here where her hair actually touches the face. You might have missed all of that. But this part is like hyper aggressive here. Look at how strongly all those fine little hairs are. To see this even better, invert this mask. So again, to invert it, I'm going to hit Command I. And you can now spot all of the contamination that's down in here. It's all that junk that's in here. All of that would have to be cleaned out. But you can also see just how bad this ultimately is on this layer, on this part. If we then take a look at our hair mask itself, the one by itself, so again, it's the second layer from the bottom. You can just tell everything in here is black except for the part that surrounds her hair. So again, I'm going to turn that eyeball on. I'm going to make that layer selected. I'm going to hold down my Option key and click on that eyeball to make sure I get rid of everything else. And then you can see all sorts of world of hurt that's actually happening in here. There's hair that's completely blue in here. There's other things that are happening, this weird other color in her hair. So I'm looking at this going, what is going on? Hold down your Shift key and click on the mask. It will temporarily get rid of it. And you can see that somehow she's actually done color work up into this hair brought in. So clearly there's a mistake that's actually happened in this part. But remember, your layer mask and your layer have nothing to do with each other. So to fix this problem, come down to your background layer, the one on the very bottom, make it active, go ahead and turn it on, and then with the bottom layer active, hit Command J. It will make a copy of your image. So it just made a copy of that background. Grab the layer mask that is on the corrupted image and simply drag it down, and then throw away the corrupted image part, and you will now have a virgin. Well, actually, that did the same thing. She's got that in her original. Oh my. Okay. This is the worst of all scenarios. She's fucked up her original one. And if you do that, you can't recover from this. So everybody see that? That blue contamination is in the background layer hair part. So what a lot of people will do is this, something to consider. I don't do this, I'm going to be honest with you. It didn't really exist when I started doing a lot of my work, so it just never became part of my workflow. But see the little lock that's sitting right down there on the bottom? We're going to go ahead and make another copy of this layer in spite of the fact that it's actually got a problem in it, but go ahead and do Command J. You'll notice when you do that Command J that you do not have a little lock next to that. We're going to take a break in 6 minutes, I promise. It does not have that little lock next to it, but if you look up at the very top of your screen, up here at the very top where it says Kind, so in my layers palette where it says Kind up in here, they've actually changed this now a little bit, so I'm not entirely certain everything that's going on in here, but it looks like all of these have changed now, so I'm winging this one. But nonetheless, I'm going to guess I'm probably pretty good at what actually is going on here. If you click on the first one, what you'll end up doing, you'll see that there's a little switch on the side here that didn't used to exist, whatever. These are all various locks to control what you can and you can't do with your image. So the first of these locks, I think, is the Move tool, although that's not it. So if I hover over this long enough, hopefully it'll actually tell me what it is. So it's filter for pixel. No, this is actually filtering. These are not my locks at all. Oh, sorry. Never mind. Click on that thing again, and instead look right up at the very top of your layers palette, right to the left of where it says Fill. This is where your locks are, and they're all still the same. So the first one, if you click on the first lock right here, what this does is it locks transparency. So if you had something transparent in your image, which we can actually make, so unlock this first. I'm going to zip back out. I'm going to just give my lasso tool, the L key, and I'm just going to grab a big old area of this. Please do this with me. Hit the delete key to actually get rid of that area, and then turn everybody else off. Hit Command T to deselect. All I wanted to do is introduce transparency into this image. And you can tell I've got a transparent part in here because I've got the checkerboard on it. If I hit the B key to get a brush and make it a larger brush, change it to normal blending mode, 100% opacity, 100% flow. Black is my foreground color. You'll see I can actually paint across this entire image, including that transparent area. If you hit Command Z to undo that and then lock transparency by clicking on that little lock, now when you do the same thing, you'll notice that the transparency remains pristine. You cannot paint on that transparent area. These sorts of things will help you do work down the line, because if you can get your knockouts to be perfect, then you can actually impact your backgrounds without worrying about painting into the area that you've already actually knocked out. So that would be a good one to actually have. The next lock over, and you can do multiple locks. So I'm clicking on the next lock over, and the next lock over is the paintbrush. So again, if you hit the B key and you actually go to paint, sorry, I'm not on that layer. Somehow I got another layer on mine. So I'm going to go back to the one that I'm actually on right now. Again, I'm going to lock the paint layer part right here. And that is still painting on that, and oh, sorry, it did my transparency again. Again, I'm going to click on the brush so that I can't paint on the image, and it should. Oh, that's interesting. So new behavior. What it's doing is it's protecting the image that I've got. It will not let me paint on that image, but it's creating a new layer for me to paint on. So this new layer I could actually throw away. So in effect, it is protecting it, but in the old days when you used to do this previous version of Photoshop, I think the last one, if you actually to try to paint on, when you brought your brush over on the top, it was like putting a brush onto a smart object. You would just get that circle with the slash going through it saying that you couldn't do that. The next image over is the move image. So again, it's 2 sets of crossed arrows. So now if we come back to my original image and I hit the V key to actually move, sorry, I'm locking the above layers. When it makes that new layer, I'm actually locking the above layer. So let me let me go back to the beginning, get rid of that second layer. On the layer that's got the hole in it, I'm going to click on the crossed arrows, and now when I come over to actually try to move this guy, you'll see you can drag it all over, but nothing happens. It can't move, and then you get this warning. This is what used to happen with the brush tool when you were trying to lock it. The next one over, I think, is a rotation or a transform, I don't know. And then the final one that actually looks like a lock, if you click on that, it locks everything. So a lot of people, the minute they open up a file in Photoshop, they'll actually click on locking everything, which in theory is what her first one should have been. So my guess is the only way she could have actually gotten that blue in that hair was to actually do some work on an image and then merge it down or something, somehow, because with this thing locked, she should not have been able to actually do that part. Make sense? So why this really matters when you get into doing really serious compositing work, that kind of stuff, and you start using your keyboard shortcuts, it's very easy to hit the V key instead of the B key. This is just my experience, and so what you end up doing is you hit the move tool instead of the brush tool, and then with your first stroke you actually move part of the image, and it may be really subtle. It may be so subtle you don't notice that you've actually done that part, but what will happen is that your layers then go out of register. And when that happens and you realize it, then you're really in for a world of hurt. Because if you've been working for hours after you made that subtle little move and your layers are now out of register, you've actually got to go back in time to find when that happened. Are we good on this part? Okay, let's do this. I've got 2:30 right now. Let's do a hard 10, guys. If you could be back at 2:40, we will actually start Sunny and do it. We're not going to do it entirely, but we'll get close.